Hello, everyone. So this is the 10th showcase we've done. The second one we've done externally. So anyone watching on the replay or joining later, this is a great opportunity to hear about what we're doing inside the Crux team. So there's a few things to cover off. We'll try and fit them into as short a time frame as possible. We're conscious John has to leave after his bit, so we'll hopefully get to that within the next half an hour. I'll just briefly touch on the fact that, since the last release, we've got quite a lot of changes going in. So we've got a reasonably confident timeline around when we want to make the next release. But certainly, if you look on Master now, we have quite a few. So if people haven't seen this before, this is the project board where we, just again publicly show what we're working on. And you can see in the right-hand side there, the awaiting release column. So 28 things in there. So there's a lot of minor bug fixes, small changes to internal behaviors, but nothing too worth highlighting aside from what was on this list. And in terms of the 1.7.0 release, we reckon we'll probably cut that next week, but we haven't made a firm commitment to that, but we do have some other timelines we're working towards. So that's our aim. If you have any questions, obviously get in contact. So up first this week is Dan to talk about the builds.
Okay, so it's probably best to start with the kind of motivation behind this for anything else. So Crux, kind of by design, is unbundled, which has a few effects. One being that there's a lot of options in how you actually run your nodes. But it does, and it's good, and it gives a lot of choice to the user. But it also requires a bit of configuration if you want to, say, if you want to get Kafka in. There's a small amount of work to be done there. So we kind of have want to strike a balance there, where we make it slightly easier to kind of get started and give some common configurations that we kind of advise, but without taking away any of the kind of options that you already have. Kind of so that's kind of what we want to do. And so the aim is to kind of have these, to have Uber jars, Docker containers, and Maven artifacts which get deployed on release. And also to have a builder tarball, so you can get the tarball and you can create your own configurations really easily by changing a couple of files. So I'm going to start off by sharing the screen, and I'm just going to show a small release page that I kind of drafted up on my fork. It's just kind of showing a couple of the things that would be in there. So I'm just going to quickly do that. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yep, we can.
Good. So if I go over to this page, I've got a small little description. I don't know if we can probably include a link to that. But in it currently is a standalone jar, which starts up a memory-only, a completely in-memory Crux node, and the builder tarball. So I've got these downloaded, and I'm going to show each one quickly. So I'm just going to stop presenting and present over screen. So moving over to this one. Hopefully you see that?
Yep.
Good. So I have in here, I've got the jar and the tarball. So if I quickly start up the jar, it will create a memory-only standalone node. There we go. I'm just going to zoom out a little bit. So that it also kind of shows you what settings you already have on it. This is part of the command line interface, which we have. So this is a memory-only node. And also, I should point out that's actually because I think I've already got one running somewhere. So it tried to bind to port 3000, which then failed, but it's not too much of an issue. So that's the one that's provided. That's the jar, and we probably have a few of these for different common configurations. And I'm going to showcase the builder with the Docker. So I'm just going to quickly get that. So if I start by extracting the tar in here, it has the Crux builder folder. So going to Crux builder, we have the 3 different types of deployment. I'm going to go into Docker. And inside here is a Crux Eden file, which has some Crux configuration settings, and a depth Eden, which has your dependencies. And if I were to, if I run the script in here, build Docker, that's interesting.
Dash down.
Oh, right. That'll be why. Amazing. Copied and pasted it. Right. So I recently built this, so it's just quickly rebuilt it. And then I can do Docker run and expose the port, which I'm going to quickly do. There we go. So this starts up a Docker node. And, sorry, apparently I have it running somewhere. There you go. Right, if I do that again, it can bind to port 3000 this time. Same again, except now this is running in Docker.
And that latest tag is a local thing,
Yeah,
right?
this is local, yeah. The idea being that this can be deployed onto Docker Hub as well. So this someone could easily download this and build their own, and then we also build a couple of images as well. So again, that started up with memdb. It's got some custom settings for Docker, so it's got its own DB dir, which is Dockerized. But yeah, so the kind of idea is I can go into deps.eden or crux.eden, change some settings, and it'll change. So if I'm going to quickly also show my Emacs and make some edits to the deps.eden and the crux.eden. Here we go. Right. So in the depths.eden, I have added. Oh, hang on. Sorry about that. Right. So in the depths.eden, I want to add rocksdb to this rather than using an in-memory KV store. So if I in the depths.eden, if I add a dependency to rocksdb. And I change, and also in here, I think this needs to be reloaded. Yep. So if I change that to rocksdb, now if I'm going to quickly on my overscreen, I'm going to rebuild my my Docker container using Docker build again, because I've changed the deps.eden and the crux.eden in that folder.
Oh, we might have lost the screen share.
Really? Okay. I'll represent because I'm going to change screens anyway.
Okay.
Apologies about that.
That's all right.
Dan, make sure that dep's even saved.
Yeah, I think
There's a message down at the bottom.
Okay, I'll check. I'm pretty sure it did, but it may not have done. You're probably right. 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 So hopefully, I'll check that. Yeah. Okay, it has. So I'll build it just to check. But yeah. So that's fine. That is showing that screen. Right?
Yes.
So running that again, same command. I've changed the settings to use rocksdb on the KV store and added the dependency.
And by default, that rocksdb is still inside the Docker image, or is it outside?
So in the dependencies that we have by default, it doesn't have rocksdb. It's just Crux core, the HTTP server, and the command line interface currently. So this is something that you bring in and you rebuild the Docker. So you get the ability to build your own Docker images, your own configurations.
Okay, But that
So-
that RocksDB, is it still inside the container? Yeah.
No. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yes. When you rebuild it, yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Right, I see. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, that's started up with RocksDB in there, and it's got the dependency. So, just a pretty quick one, but that's kind of showcasing where it's at anyway currently.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks for that. That's a good overview. And you've also started looking at the getting those builds to automatically deploy from Circle to GitHub, right?
That's right.
And CloudWatch ideally, if we can make that work.
And Docker Hub.
And Docker Hub, yeah. So for people who are not familiar with Line or the Clojure tooling and don't have to download and clone the repo, etc., they can hopefully access Crux more easily. Great. Well, thanks. That's a good overview. So next up was Tom. Did you want to look at the production metrics work?
Yeah, sure. So I've recently been adding metrics into Crux. So there's a bunch of cards on there which you can see one progress through, but currently ingest metrics have been added. So that's seeing how many documents have been ingested into the document store, and also a TX store, well, the TX log rather, by the indexer. So in fact, I'll just show you some of the graphs that I can output. Basically, you can get graphs and data out about how the Crux node's running and what's it got inside it. So let's just show. So at the moment, I've got a Crux node running, and this has been in the background. I've started it at like 2:05, and it's just been I had 2 threads on there, which one's running a load of just every a random interval between 0 and 6 seconds. It's running a random. It's just ingesting a random document with like a random ID, and so here we can see the every time that a new document is indexed, well, a new document call is indexed. So it could be multiple documents in one call. You can see that this thing is incrementing up here. So at the moment, what's our count at the moment? It's like 535 documents that are in there. Sorry for the resolution, by the way. My screen's 4K, and for some reason this doesn't like scaling. But we can also have a look at the index TXs, and we can see that we've got 873 in there. And so with the index TXs as well, this it takes a little bit of time to do this indexing. So you can actually see the amount of time that it takes to index. So at the moment, it's like the mean rate is 0.4 milliseconds, which is what you'd expect for ingesting one document using. I think this is actually a mem node as well, rather than Rock's KV, so it's even faster. Well, but yeah. So we got that. So this is with JMX, but the actual way that metrics are being stored at the moment is through DropWizard, or rather through DropWizard metrics. And this is loads of different interfaces in order to talk to various things. So the one, this is talking to it via JMX, but by default, well, not by default, the library that I've been looking at, Clojure Metrics, already had CSV and console output. So they're called they're called reporters. There we go. So you have a registry which stores all the metrics, and then you give that registry to reporters, which can do whatever they want to it. So this JMX reporter does it, outputs them as beans. You've got a CSV reporter, and then you've got a console reporter, and they're the main three that have been included in Metric Closer. And currently, the work that I've been doing, like today and yesterday, have been adding also CloudWatch, CloudWatch reporter. So I recently got this working. I'll just show my Firefox so you can have a quick look at what that looks like. So here you can see. Ooh, can you see?
Yep.
Right, yeah. Here you can see what this looks like. At the moment, I still need to sort out the rate because at the moment it's doing it every 5 minutes, and the benchmark takes about 15. So we're only seeing 3 dots, but you can sort of see what it will look like. So we've got all these various different things that we can see. Like there's also an option to include the JVM metrics. So you've got this all in one place. You don't have to go scurrying around for all this stuff. So like JVM uptime here, and then we've also got our Crux thing. So Crux, how many index docs we've got. This is how long queries are taking on average. This is these are the percentiles of the various query and indexing things. So like what's the top 99.9% taking? Like, so you see the outliers and stuff like that. So, and also you get nice CloudWatch metric data graphs out. So yeah, so that's what I've been doing, and so I'm going to be keeping on expanding that and adding more metrics, and hopefully by 1.7 we'll have some very fancy, pretty graphs to show. So, yeah, thank you very much.
Oh, thanks. That's really exciting because we've just talked about having these sorts of things for a long time. So it's great that we now have some observability on the environments. So I'll just share my screen again very briefly. Maybe not briefly, actually. Let's just have a look. So yeah, so I just wanted to say as well. So we've been using these metrics internally to run against a nightly benchmark. Yeah, we're tracking our own performance benchmarks in a more automated way now. So these are images of our Slack channel. I'm just going to let someone in because they've joined. Okay. So yeah. So anyway, this bench environment is a way for us to make sure we're not having any regressions from day-to-day builds, and also it's something we can evolve into being more for benchmarking against the other database data sets and things that we already have in the repo. So that's something to evolve as well. Back to the order of events. We'll come back to the internal event bus. I think we'll hand the mic over to John if you're there still to talk about the pluggable Docker and object store plans and what we're thinking there and what we've done.
Sure. Let me just get something ready. Docker store.
And while it's doing that, I'll just say, so the internal event bus is something that James implemented to enable us to have the metrics. So within Crux now, between the modules, you can publish and subscribe to events via in-memory keys.
Okay, I'll just say briefly what I've been working on. I don't think it's at a point to really show. Okay. But right now in Crux, the way it works is that documents go onto a document topic, and then each node ingests all of those documents. So each node would have to have a copy of all of the different documents that have been submitted to Crux. So what I am working on is the idea of introducing a doc store, which is a new concept in Crux. We have an object store, which is this local copy of all the documents. But I wanted to introduce the concept of a doc store, and this is where you submit documents to. And this would be to replace the content topic in Kafka. So you have this as a different option. And then this could be, for instance, S3, or it could be JDBC, or it could be some sort of file object store that's based off a shared drive. This then has the advantage, obviously, that you don't have to use Kafka to store the documents, which is most of the weight, most of the disk space usage on Kafka. Kafka is quite big, obviously, because it shards it, it partitions it. There's lots going on. It's also, Kafka itself is quite, it's nuanced the way it stores those documents because it has a compaction process, and that might not be optimal for what you want. And then also a document store that is backed by S3 just gives you different features. It means that also each node can sort of wrap a cache around a remote doc store. So each node wouldn't have to have a copy of everything that is in that doc store. So that's what I'm working towards. There's a PR that's gone in recently that introduces the concept of a doc store and has that split. And there's we have a test fixture which simulates what S3 might look like. What I want to do now is drive that really to conclusion. Most of the invasive work in Crux is done. Now we need to do the fun bit of actually building a JDBC doc store or S3 to start to test it.
Yeah, and benchmarking it as well.
Right. We need to benchmark it. There are some edge cases, as always, in Crux, which is always lots of fun to think about. So some of the things I've come up against is if you have a doc store that's centralized like S3 or JDBC, it's a bit different to really the way that the Kafka doc store works, because we're putting tombstones onto the Kafka doc store that get picked up and reprocessed, where that wouldn't actually happen in the case where you've got a centralized doc store and there's no asynchronous consumer hanging off the back of it. And also transaction functions are somewhat fun because they generate documents that currently we don't put onto the Kafka doc topic. So there's little things like that. If you want to have an object store that's a cache in front of something remote, how do you deal with things like the documents generated by transaction functions that you don't really want to store centrally remote? Or maybe we do. If we're using S3 and JDBC, maybe that's more acceptable. And these are the sort of things I'm coming up against as I work my way through it. But so far, so good. I think it's overall, it's going to be a good change for Crux. Crux was born in an environment where Kafka and an object store lived side by side, and a sort of previous version of Crux sort of fit in the middle. So this is an architecture that's always been envisioned. And when we speak to potential clients, when we look at potential architectures, there's normally some sort of object store in place that they use to store their chunky documents. So it feels intuitive to investigate this path, and it would help with potential clients that are concerned about disk space as well.
Yeah, and other sort of benefits could be things like geo-partitioning. So if certain key ranges need to have like residency in certain jurisdictions, maybe you could use just an idea, but which we might explore, but something like CockroachDB, which has this geo-partitioning concept, and then you can have a globally distributed object store or doc store that allows you to use Crux in a way that sort of respects the where you're allowed to actually store the data. So yeah, lots of interesting stuff. Thanks for that, John. James, did you want to chat about the API changes a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So a bit of background on these API changes. Obviously, we're Crux is currently in alpha, so we're currently undergoing a fair bit of change on the API. But the aim really with this is to make sure that by the time that we get beyond alpha, we can present a stable and hopefully easy to use API out to both Clojure users and also Java users from the wider JVM ecosystem. So we're going to be making a number of changes probably in the next few months in order that we can release a stable API at some point in the future. I will just share my screen as well.
Okay. So whilst that's happening, I will just mention the batch ingestion. So I guess related to the metrics, I just want to show you this graph and the context of what I'm describing. So this graph is basically what Tom was showing about Crux having almost like a flat ingestion rate. So the idea of using rocks was always that we could overcome inherent ingestion bottlenecks with other technologies which use more distributed indexing. So the fact we have all the index locally is a tremendous advantage for having sort of a stable profile. So that's something we're very conscious of and want to improve even. So we, since the last release, have added some batching, which actually improves the ingestion's performance. So before it was syncing every, I think it was like every doc within a transaction. So it could be multiple operations in the transaction. Every doc was independently f-synced and ingested, whereas we now we've batched up, I think by default by 100 or so. And that's gained quite a large increase in performance. So as we make the benchmark environment more robust, we'll be able to share those sorts of things publicly as well. James, are you back?
Excellent. Right, take two. So API changes are coming in as part of 1.7. So first of all, I want to talk about sync. Now, sync is used when you want to read your own writes. And the reason we changed this one is actually it's been used for multiple different things, as you can see from the two use cases at the top here. One of which was to get a node reasonably up to date, where we just took a node and an optional timeout. And the idea behind this was that the node would keep reading off the Kafka log until it was up to date, and then return to you, so that you could then make queries based on the updated data. And the second one here actually took in a transaction time as well as a compulsory timeout, actually, in this case. And what this did was when you had submitted a transaction that you wanted to read the results of, you would then call sync, pass in the transaction time and a timeout. And then after that point, you were guaranteed to be able to read the write that you've just made. Now, in 1.7, what we've done with this is we've actually split this out into three distinct use cases. Sync without the TX time remains the same. That just makes sure the node's reasonably up to date. But then we've added in both await TX and await TX time. to be really clear about what these functions are doing. So with await TX, we pass that in the TX that pass that straight in the TX that comes back from submit TX here, and that has the that then allows us to, as I say, read our own writes again. Related to that, we've got a TX committed function that's now in. So previously we had two functions here: submitted TX updated entity and submitted TX corrected entity. And the only reason for these two being like this was that we didn't, in Crux, we didn't keep any record of failed transactions. So transactions that failed as a result of the CAS compare and swap precondition not being true. So what you had to do was make your transaction, sync the node as we did previously, and then check whether this entity, James, got updated as a result of this transaction. And then that was enough. That was then sufficient for you to say, right, yep, okay, I have updated the balance. I have made the withdrawal. I can now do any side effects I needed to do as a result. We've replaced this now with TX committed, which here just takes a node and a transaction. So you don't have to worry about the implementation detail here behind Crux. All we need to know is, did this transaction commit or did it roll back? And in this case, if my balance was 10 beforehand, we now know it's 5 after. And again, I can actually dish out the cash, presumably, in this use case. Finally, as well, we were looking at OpenTX log. We're looking at the getting a TX log out of Kafka. And previously, we needed to do this by getting hold of a new TX log context, which was then a closable. So the user would have had to close that. And then we pass that into a TX log call. And at that point, we can iterate through it. And in this case, I'm just dumping the whole lot to a tx's.even file. This is probably the first in a set of changes that we're looking to make over the next while. Particularly around, and I think if you're familiar with the API, you'll have seen things like snapshots on there as well, which again are these resources that we expect users to pass around. Now, the idea is that we take this burden away from users in the new API, and we add a function called OpenTXLog. And what this does is both the resource itself, so TXLog is part of the with open, but then that gives you the iterator of the transactions in this case that you're iterating through. So it's the same resource in this case. And that ensures that it's clear to users that they have to use up the TX log within this with open. Otherwise their resource is going to get closed. So there's a few places that this also applies. So it's mostly to do with snapshots on the API, which we'd like the user not to have to care about at all. I think that's all the changes that come in for 1.7.
I think the other thing was the entity. Yeah, the entity change, or maybe I got that in before the last release. I know I don't know down the entity change. So I actually added a snapshot argument to entity. So that's arguably a use case where we might again change it if we figure out a nice way to handle it as a resource. Great. So let me just go back to my presentation. Okay. So a few other topics. So Confluent platform. Plexus on Clojure and Slack asked about, have we seen the Confluent platform updates? So in their latest release, which is 5.4, they've announced that they have this infinite retention model, which is what the Onyx store promised, and things like Apache Pulsar offer, where you have this tiered storage, which allows you to take use Kafka just for the most recent parts of the log, and then you can asynchronously push all the parts of the log to cheaper places to store data, such as S3 or network file systems. So I haven't looked at the exact details of what they support, but the idea that they support this is obviously very useful for Crux, because we require this infinite storage of the TX log, certainly. So it's a really good model. The other thing it added was role-based access control, which again is something which we don't natively address in Crux. So if the Confluent platform can provide that, that's arguably a way to have an RBAC system which is compatible and useful for enterprises, and when they're thinking about how can we use Crux, but still have RBAC features. And they also have this follow fetching mode, which is sort of a halfway house between sort of this asynchronous replica and like an in-sync node within a particular topic group or cluster. So I forget the language, but the idea is anyway that this could open the doors to having Crux running across multiple regions, say, all running from the same transaction log efficiently without them all having to go back to the leader. So yeah, it reduces bandwidth and that sort of thing. So anyway, some interesting updates. So we're going to explore that a bit more and make sure we're clear in the docs about how it all plugs together. I'm just going to let someone else in. Hello, Lucio. So yeah, that's come from platform. John and I were at the Clojure meetup in Paris last week, which was really good. The recording of that should be out soon. I did a little demo on stage about implementing the Crux like by temp model. So Håkon in his Clojure trade talk had a screenshot of some code which sort of did a very lightweight valid time transaction time thing, just purely using Clojure data structures. And I just elaborated on that a bit more and made it into more of a thing you can actually sort of simulate a bit like DataScript. Which brings me on to the next topic, which is that someone at that meetup mentioned how they had this use case of synchronizing datums coming from a server with front-end clients running DataScript. And he was saying, well, if we had a nice model for mapping Crux to DataScript, then potentially enable a lot of new use cases for front-end developers. So this got me thinking, and I just spent a little bit of time over this last week, reflecting on it. So what have we got? So there are a few caveats, like because it's Crux is the master, DataScript is just a read-only slave. It has to respect the rules of Crux. So you have to have a Crux ID. Everything's cardinality many, and for this implementation, it has to have a prefix. Anyway, so these are the different functions, and it produces a report which is compatible with DataScript. So you can see here it takes a Crux put and creates a map which gets inserted into DataScript, and et cetera. Anyway, so you go to the test code, and you can see here we've got a couple of ops, Crux ops. We're doing with open and transacting the result in, converting the result of the submit to Crux into a DataScript report, and then running a query against DataScript. So this data log isn't Crux data log, it's DataScript data log, but running over data imported from Crux. And so like another thing I had to get working was, so in Crux, you can just arbitrarily reference other entities. You don't have to have those entities in the database already, whereas that's something that DataScript doesn't support. Similarly, if you delete an entity in DataScript, you have to delete all references to that entity. So Crux is more detached than that, or decoupled. It doesn't enforce those constraints. So here we can see that whilst I haven't created an entity called other EID, in essence, in DataScript, a new entity is created, which allows you to then query its ID. So that's something which is now live on Crux Labs. So if you have interest in that, please do check it out. Other things, so the beta, so the website's going to get updated over the next 3 or 4 days with information on the beta. So that's now sort of confirmed what we're doing there, and we've got some other timelines internally to factor into that. But we think opening up the door to anyone that's interested to email us, and we'll have a kickoff call in the next couple of weeks. That's the plan. Kafka Summit. I'll be speaking at the Kafka Summit in London in April, which is quite an exciting opportunity, and mainly discussing Crux in the context of people that have sort of Kafka scale problems. But it should be a good opportunity, and if you're there, I'll be glad to meet. And the final thing to talk about is XT20, which you may not have seen. So it's a conference we're running in Juxt. We last ran XT16, so it's a kind of thing we do every 4 years. And we've got some amazing speakers lined up, and tickets are available now. We've not publicized this too much, and there's only a limited number of tickets, so I do suggest checking it out sooner rather than later. But yeah, obviously a good lineup with the likes of Alan Kay and co. So with that, over to Q&A to anyone, Lucia or Ben, if you had any questions, or if anyone wants to talk about anything.
I just want to poke that we haven't talked about the event bus yet.
Okay, yeah, I did briefly mention it.
Sorry, I didn't.
No, that's okay. Yeah, I mean, I didn't go into much detail. It was just while John was setting up. But James, did you want to say anything else on that?
No, to be honest, I think you covered that one. It's largely an internal thing, as the name suggests. So,
yeah.
The reason for it is for third-party Crux modules to be able to talk to each other. And in this case, we're let's say for Tom's metrics work there. We do use the event bus, so the Crux core can actually fire events at the metrics. And it means we can decouple the two in that way. But it also means that because Crux is open source, we'd like to see a whole number of third-party modules, and we're looking for this to be a way for them to communicate with the core and get information about what the core is doing and things like that.
Yeah, so we've not got that documented on the docs yet, so that's still sort of to be done. But yeah, another key use case for this is like following the transaction feeds of successful transactions. So with the TX log or this open TX log, it's it's as of the certain as of the time you read it. Whereas it'd be nice to be able to listen reactively to things as they come in, which is actually I've noted down in this source file in order for this thing to really work, because right now it's a bit hard coded. It really only works with one node. What you actually want is to integrate the feed of all transactions coming from all nodes. So yeah, we'd need to use one of these event bus hooks as a module to do that. So that's work to be done. Cool. Thank you, everyone. It's great to talk through these things, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks, hopefully. Cheers.